Thank you, Kate. Good morning. Welcome to the Early Childhood Workforce Registry Rulemaking Advisory Committee. I don't think we could have made that title longer if we wanted to. Our agenda today is to do a brief welcome and introductions, about 10 minutes. We'll review what a RAC is, the purpose and the scope for about 5 minutes. We'll do the purpose and need for these rule changes for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to get into the draft rule language, and we're going to spend about 90 minutes there. It'll be broken down a little bit within that. So we have about 10 minutes to review the purpose of these rules. We'll have about 10 minutes to talk about the administration, 25 minutes to talk through definitions, and then we'll talk through 3 rules today and spend about 15 minutes on each rule. That'll conclude our day for today. We'll do some closing comments and we'll come back tomorrow and get to the last rule. Next slide. So I'm going to go through these welcome and introductions. I'm going to introduce myself and then I'm going to pass it on to the next person. My name is Sierra Hake. I am she, her pronouns, professional learning system effectiveness coordinator. I'm going to pass to Sydney, who you're going to hear a lot from today. And then Sydney, you can pass it to the next person.
I am Sydney Train. I'm the she, her. I am the higher education analyst and also manage the agreement for the Oregon Registry through Oregon Center for Career Development. John?
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is John Reeves. I'm the Professional Learning System Director here at the Department of Early Learning and Care, and really excited to join you all today. I will pass it on to, Kathy's not here, correct? So it's Kate. All right, Kate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Dennison, Government Affairs Manager for DELC. I'm standing in for Kathy away today. She's off getting married, so yay. And I will be answering any questions about the rulemaking process and taking notes to support our team. Thank you for coming today. I'll pass it to Kate R.
Good morning. My name is Kate Rosenberg. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an executive assistant with the Policy and Government Affairs team here at DELC, and I'm here to support the RAC meeting. And I will pass it to my colleague, Karina.
Oh, Karina, I think, got kicked out and is coming back in. Karina Lopez Mendoza is also joining us today. You're going to hear the most from Sydney and I. Oh, go ahead, Karina, you're back. If you want to just introduce yourself real quick.
Yes, good morning. My name is Karina Lopez Mendoza, and I'm the Team Support Specialist for the Professional Learning Systems Office.
So you'll be hearing the most from Sydney and I today, but we have this list of people here today. So if you have any questions, issues with technology, please feel free to reach out to almost anybody on this list. I'm not sure, maybe not John. I don't know how your technology skills are, John, but definitely the Kates and Karina. And I'm going to ask you now, if you haven't yet, to just change your name on Zoom so that we can be able to call on you by name. And it looks like almost everybody has been able to do that. And then we're going to ask you to introduce yourselves when you come off mute to share a thought. So for now, we're going to just move on to the next part. Next slide. So Zoom protocols. Oh, go back one, please. Zoom protocols and group norms. So our work is to center children, families, and early learning professionals. We ask that anyone who wants to speak, please raise your hand. To raise your hand, you can click the reactions icon on the bottom of your screen, click raise hand, or I guess *9 if you're joining by phone. You're also welcome to put things into the chat. We'll be monitoring that pretty closely. We encourage you to have your camera on, but it is not required. We ask you to keep your mic muted unless it's your turn to speak. And we just ask that everyone's respectful of each other and to remain focused on the topic rule section. Again, if you need tech support, let us know in the chat. We are going to keep to our timing of things. So you will hear likely one of the Kates say, we have about 1 more minute left in this, or that's our 10 minutes. And then we'll we'll gather what we have and continue to move forward. Anything that's put in the chat, we will read aloud for recording purposes, because I don't think the chat gets recorded. So we want to make sure that it is said out loud in the actual recording. Next slide. So the RAC purpose. The RAC is a rulemaking advisory committee, and it is a group of people appointed by an agency to provide input and guidance during the rulemaking process. Again, the purpose is to provide input and advice to agencies on our proposed rules. The function is to review the proposed rules and offer recommendations on the notice of proposed rulemaking. Next slide. So the purpose and need for these rule changes, as instructed by House Bill 2991, aims to improve access to jobs in Oregon's early childhood workforce by addressing barriers such as the cost of translation, unclear and inconsistent qualification evaluation, inability to transfer professional development from outside the state, and the inability of employers to access registry records. Next slide. Engagement that has happened so far. In 2023, a study and report was submitted by the National Workforce Registry Alliance on possible improvements to the registry system. In 2024, there was a large research project done by the Early Childhood Equity Collaborative that informed the direction of these rules. They engaged in ethnically and culturally diverse collective interviews and listening sessions, both in person and virtual, and reviewed more than 120 documents for a literature review. The Oregon Center for Career Development also facilitated community engagement on barriers within the Oregon registry system. And now in 2025, the Oregon Center for Career Development has submitted a proposal for a revised registry system. We've had multiple meetings on rules internal to DELC with many different offices. We've had meetings on the rules external to DELC with the Department of Justice, and again with the Early Childhood Equity Collaborative. We've also had many meetings in response to the registry revisions, and we've gotten feedback in response to a Dear Tribal letter, which has led us here. Next slide. So our timeline so far is that House Bill 2991 requires DELC to begin adoption of rules by December 31st, 2025. So September 2nd, we brought a draft to our internal policy team for a preview. September 3rd, we notified the ELC, the Early Learning Council, that we were going to do a rule review. September 5th, we opened up RAC recruitment, closed it on October 3rd. Now where the star is, we are holding the RAC. There is a public hearing that is happening on October 27th in the evening. Public comment period is October 1st through the 30th, where we will continue to take feedback and edit and adjust what our draft is. And then in December, the Early Learning Council is going to vote on the proposed adoption with an effective date of January 1st, 2026. And I believe, Sydney, is this where I'm turning it over to you? No, I got it still. I know what I'm talking about. So House Bill 2991, which was into 2023, the rule ask is first to establish consistent standards for assessing the professional qualifications and academic experience of early childhood professionals for the purposes of determining the appropriate worker classifications and pay rates for such professionals. This is the rule that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about tomorrow. So today we're going to focus on 2, 3, and 4. So 2 is streamlining the processes used to verify or accredit the out-of-state professional or academic credentials of an early childhood professional to determine whether those credentials count towards qualifications that are specific to the early childhood workforce in Oregon. 3, providing a foreign language translation feature within the Early Childhood Workforce Registry for early childhood professionals to translate relevant documents free of charge. And 4, establishing standards and processes by which an early childhood professional may provide consent to a hiring agency to access the professional's workforce registry account to provide technical assistance to the professional. And one more slide. So here is our workforce registry rule set. We're going to talk about purpose, definitions, administration. Career pathways is what's happening in our conversation tomorrow. So we're going to focus on foreign language translation, verifying out-of-state professional development. Oh, and we didn't update this last slide, but I believe it is training record access. So those will be the 3 today. So as we get into this, again, we have timing to be able to move us through. And Sydney's going to talk now about some of the implementation considerations as we work on this.
Thank you, Sierra. So I just wanted to make a note on these that we really want to leave space in these rules to have genuine engagement and get a lot of feedback so that we make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences. A lot of these things are very connected, and so you'll get that when you look at the draft rules if you haven't seen them already. Because if we put it in rule, it has to be that way unless we go through a whole new rules process. And we really want to make sure that we have engagement and are able to talk more. As you can tell, we have these 2 days to get feedback from you and then some written feedback. But in terms of thinking through the actual implementation of these things, we need more time to think through the details and make sure that we do it in the best way possible. So, John.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something really quick. Just thinking about, these rules are sort of the container for where we really want to head our system. And so as you're thinking about this is really the overarching rule set that's going to guide us for a period of time. So it's a way for us to really be looking at, are these the types of things that we want that are flexible within the system? And then at some point when we get to those details Sydney was talking about, then we'll be looking at, how do we put more rules into place to really solidify those things? But this is really setting a stage for where we want to head and all the elements that we really want in a workforce system that supports our educators in a really distinct way so that they can use all the evidence of their qualifications to, be qualified for the jobs that they're seeking. And among other things that have been barriers in the system.
Thanks, John. So while we're looking at these rules today and tomorrow, the things that we'd really like for you to keep in the forefront of your mind are when thinking about yourself or those groups that you represent, we want you to think about what the fiscal impact might be for you and if that might be prohibitive. Think about whether or not this language is clear and understandable. Think about if there are any inequity impacts based on these rules that would be barriers or any other unintended consequences. So that's our focus in looking at these draft language today. So here is the purpose that we have drafted. I'll read it out loud for you, and then I'll give some time for any responses or feedback that you have. The purpose of this OAR, or these OARs, the group of them that we're going to discuss, is to establish and maintain a workforce registry system that supports a qualified and diverse early learning workforce, reduces administrative inefficiencies, and provides accurate and accessible workforce information for the department's programs and for other system partners. These rules apply to all early learning workforce members, hiring agencies, and entities using the workforce registry, and serve the broader purpose of supporting high-quality care and education for Oregon's children and families through the department's programs, including but not limited to licensing, subsidy, and quality improvement, as well as other system partners. And then there's the statutory authority listed. So again, there's likely not a fiscal impact in this statement here, but is this language clear? Is there anything in here that sounds like it might create a barrier or some unintended consequence? I see some heads shaking no. Yeah, Tiffany.
Hello, I'm Tiffany Busby. I am the early learning coordinator for CCR&R. So I work directly with the apprenticeship programs as well as new and establishing businesses. I have a couple notes that I kind of made when I was reviewing everything. So one is just ensuring that the language is really explicit that it's including those diverse professional pathways. So like apprenticeship, CTE, lived experience, higher education, so that it's really clear kind of from the get-go. And then encouraging that reference to coordination across the system. So with HEC and BOLI and DELC, just to reduce duplication in the future. I also was going to ask for some clarity on efficiency, that's meaning not just a fast, sorry, I'm getting over a cold, that it's not just meaning a faster process because we've met, but that it's more geared towards like reduction of redundancy and greater equity. So those are kind of my suggestions in this area. Just for equity, just so that we're really acknowledging those non-traditional learning routes, so that we're not reinforcing the barriers that are currently in place.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you, Tiffany, for introducing yourself and what your role is in the system. I really appreciate that. I meant to say that up front, that would be a great way to start, since we didn't take time to kind of go through and all introduce ourselves. And Kate's made note of those, Kate Dennison, and so we'll be able to think about those in looking at redrafting any pieces of this. One of the things in what you said that I think I would have to look into is how we can include partner agencies, since these rules apply directly to us. But that's a conversation that I can have with our rules coordinator and get some information about what that might look like. Any other thoughts on this one?
Just really quick, I was just going to say, even just rewording it to leave that as an option in the future, especially when it comes to apprenticeship programs, so that educators aren't having to constantly be uploading something that the state is already doing for them. And so that way it's reducing that barrier of repeating processes.
Okay, can you, just so I'm really clear, talk through that a little bit more about what documents are being uploaded that the state is already doing?
Sure. So BOLI tracks time and competencies within the apprenticeship program. So a lot of it is going to depend on kind of what is being required for our side of it or for your side of it. But because BOLI and even HEC a lot of times are already taking that information in, and there's access through it through various kind of sources like workforce and things like that, and WorkHands and various various kind of resources to do that, but they require apprenticeship programs to report on that and have those files in place. And so a lot of times apprenticeships, they don't have direct access on kind of what that looks like, whereas the apprenticeship program that's running it does. So reducing that barrier and how that's being accessed, I think, is important. I think there's a further conversation with what that looks like in terms of apprenticeship, and I know that may be a way us off, but just kind of something to think about when you're writing the language with what that exactly looks like, so that they're not having to search all over for documents, as well as the documents being stored in multiple places in the state.
Gotcha. So something like OCCD being able to share those competencies that were already submitted to BOLI themselves. And I just want to note, we have Heather Irwin here as kind of our system expert from OCCD, who will be helping to co-lead the development of the documentation required and pieces of that registry system revision. And so it's good to hear those thoughts and details so we can think through with this partner. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
And Heather, if you ever have something to add, you're welcome to come off mute and add that as well.
Just taking lots of notes.
Yeah, and we will have the notes too, Heather, so we can also share those with you.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other comments on this section? Okay, and just as a reminder, there is a form on our website for public comment. So if you think of something later, you're welcome to submit it there as well. If you scroll down to the very bottom of any page on our website, there's in black letters at the bottom, it says rules. If you click on that, and then there is a a section that says public comment form or something like that, a hyperlink that you can click on and put in your public comment. Let's see. So and thank you, Kate, just put that public comment link in the chat too, if you want to grab that. So for administration, the Oregon Registry shall ensure that the early childhood workforce has access to clear and published processes for the activities listed throughout. So we wanted to make sure that this applied to all of the elements, that when we're looking at how someone's qualifications are assessed or how they bring credits in from other states, that those policies are very clearly written out so that we can ensure consistency. They're publicly published so that people can go and look and see what that process is and be really clear and informed on how it all works. Any thoughts on this section? Thanks, Tiffany. Yeah. I know your name, and I'm drawing a blank because, of course, I'm right in front of a whole bunch of people.
Oh, and my name isn't even up there. So sorry about that. I'll change that.
That's okay.
Hello, everybody. Mercedes Soy. I work at Latino Network. So my question for this one is, would in this space or would it be somewhere else where it would indicate, like, if changes were made, how much notice needs to go out that like an update to the administration is occurring? So it says it's, we're publishing those, but in like 10 years, new technology, something might change. Would we have that in a different space in the rule where like a change might be, an updated change might be published, 30 days before it takes effect or something like that? Or would it need to be stated here that there would be any update if there were changes?
No, I think that's a great point, and I think it would be in this section. So I think that's that would be a great addition. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm. And who is reading our chat questions today?
I can read it.
Thank you.
So Tiffany put this in reference to the last slide on purpose, which was recommend adding enabling language such as the department may coordinate with education and workforce partners to align data and verification processes.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that draft of what you were describing. All right. Any other thoughts on this section? All right. Getting into definitions. I'm going to read each one of these at a time and give us some time to think through them individually. So the first one, coaching, means a relationship-based process as defined by the department, designed to build capacity for specific professional dispositions, skills, and behaviors. It is a partnership that supports the development of self-awareness, self-reflection, and self-directed action. And this is coaching specifically within these rules. So where it says as defined by the department, that's really because we're connecting this definition to coaching that will be accepted within the registry itself. And so there will be some parameters, though we don't have those parameters defined yet. That'll be part of the ongoing conversation and continuing to have feedback and conversations with the public about how we make sure that we're not creating more barriers in documentation and access to those services. All right, I'm going to go on to the next one, but if you think of something and you want to go back to one, just let me know. Communities of practice means learning communities and other cohort or facilitated peer learning groups. One thing I'm noticing right now is that there has been a movement in several states to not use the abbreviation of COP. So that's something that we can consider. Tiffany.
Under COP, would that also be inclusive of cohorts and FCCNs, or kind of all encompassing various different TA in that area, or is it just communities of practice?
It would be the community of practice element of a focused childcare network. So a focused childcare network includes training, community of practice, and kind of one-on-one technical assistance. And so it would be that element of it, but also in other.
So maybe looking at the language, because I know for like our CCR&R, we use them all independently. They describe independent kind of communities. And so maybe having a broader just verbiage there for what that what that exactly means. I see that it's in the definition, but again, kind of instead of saying communities of practice at the beginning, maybe adjusting that language at the start just for broader clarification.
Can you think of an example of a word, a broader word to replace that?
I would almost just venture to say just a facilitated peer learning group, and then follow it up with meaning learning communities such as, and then kind of list some of them out that way and just kind of switch the wording around a little bit just for clarification.
Yeah, we can explore that and saying, includes community practice, PLCs can fall into that category as well. We may need to make some adjustments to the definition itself, but we can look at that. Thank you. Robert.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Kling. I'm the director of EOU Head Start over here in Union and Baker counties. We got Head Start, Preschool Promise, and OPK prenatal to 3. So I'm not sure if this is the right place to put this, but under 1, coaching, I heard reference to I believe it's a CCR&R service for providers. What was that called again?
The Focused Childcare Networks, is that what you're
Focused Childcare Network,
okay.
Yes, in reference to this coaching. And I just wanted to make sure that this definition also includes Head Start's efforts at coaching, just to be as inclusive as possible and not only think of it in terms of that Focused Childcare Network, but what Head Starts have been doing for a number of years as required by our performance standards.
Yeah, absolutely. I will clarify that the Focused Childcare Networks, we were discussing the communities of practice rather than coaching, but I know that Heather has been in conversation, Heather at OCCD that's here, has been in conversation with Head Starts to make sure that these rules align with the practices that they have. Our definition of coaching as a state is being developed along with, we've developed kind of coaching guidelines and practices for coaching towards state-funded childcare, and there is a parallel process with this led by Andy Bales Molnar that is expanding coaching and credit for coaching within our registry system. And so there will be conversations with Head Start through that process as well about what the alignment of those coaching practices are. And that's why we leave it kind of as defined by the department, because again, in rule, that gives us this door to make sure that we don't assign it specifically to practice-based coaching or some other coaching model, so that we can have those conversations and be inclusive of the different kinds of coaching that can be accepted within the system. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Is it Ty?
Yes, good morning. My name is Ty Morris. I'm with TLM Educational Services. We provide coaching, consultation, and advocacy for early childhood educators. I'm an instructional coach and a master trainer out of Oregon. And one of the things that we have had lots of conversation about is like the meaning or the definition of coaching, especially as it pertains to the engagement piece and what providers are able to get from that. I know we're trying to align it right now, but coaching is training. It's a form of training. And if we're going to streamline trying to match coaching up within the ORO and the OCCD system, maybe that language needs to start to be reflected in these definitions. Like something like designed to, where does it say? Coaching means a relationship-based process as defined by the department. And then there could be space maybe after that. That includes training, COPs, you know, da 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 da. But I think just because we're trying to make sure that it aligns, that the language and the definition of coaching maybe needs to include the word training or professional development as a piece of the work that we do.
Yeah. I think you'll see in our conversation tomorrow, we're using kind of a blanket term of professional development for a set of things that includes training, coaching, communities of practice, mentoring, all of those kinds of things. And I'll have the expanded list tomorrow to be able to look at. And or you have probably seen kind of that circle image in the package of documentation that we sent out. And for example, a focused child care network includes technical assistance, you know, kind of a form of coaching. It includes communities of practice, and it includes training. And so at the moment, we're thinking of those things kind of independently and still ensuring that we're valuing that, each of those in the system, but thinking of them separately because there are instances where it is just that one thing. There's this one-on-one support that follows coaching practices that doesn't necessarily have training associated with it, or that doesn't include a community of practice because it's individual one-on-one. But I think there is space for finding efficiency in the system, for example, by expanding that circle and including focused child care networks as a specific thing, and then that is valued as a package together. And so if there are other groups that also package those things together in their definition of coaching, we can look at including that and valuing it automatically as a certain set of points rather than taking it separately. John?
I was just thinking to what Ty was saying, you know, we could put something or consider trying to put something in this definition around getting that broad container in there around coaching as a form of professional development. And then it's going to connect up to those later definition, or not definitions, but later rules. But I think the point that I really want to stress is that we want to make sure that these forms of professional development do come with some credit. And, you know, if they're aligning with the processes that we'll be putting in place. And so, I mean, I just really wanted to acknowledge, Ty, that, you know, both you and Robert are identifying like that this is an important part of how people are learning and how they're putting things into practice. And that's another reason why we have it in here. And so it will lead us towards embedding new ways that people can get, you know, evidence that that's a thing that they're receiving and that it means something in their professional pathways.
Yeah, I mean, we've had research for ages that shows us the effectiveness of coaching on actual implementation of practice. And so we really want to make sure that we're valuing that in the system. So yeah, finding a way to identify in here that all of these things are kind of under the umbrella of professional development is something I think we can make sure we include there. Competency, or well, any other thoughts on coaching or community practice? Okay. Competency or competencies means the essential knowledge, skills, and dispositions that early childhood educators must demonstrate to effectively support the development, learning, and well-being of all young children from birth through age 8 and those in out-of-school time care through age 12. We define it this way rather than specifically kind of the NAEYC competencies that we're moving towards, because we have things like coaching competencies. We have out of school time care competencies from Oregon Ask. We have licensing competencies. And so we want to kind of be inclusive of all of those. Jessica.
Hi, Jessica Porter, South Coast Regional Early Learning Hub Development Director. I feel there's some confusion around the birth through age 8 and those in out of time school care through age 12. That may line up with other competencies, but my mind immediately goes to, well, children 5 through 8 it should just be out of school time care for them as well. So that separation is a little bit confusing to me and unclear. I don't know if anyone else feels that.
Okay, thank you. We can go, I think that came from licensing, and probably has to do with kind of some allowances for ECE coverage of, for example, students with disabilities. And so those specific ECE services go through that age, but I can go and check because I'm not the authority on those licensing pieces. I can go and make sure that that's accurate. And maybe we include some additional language to make that more clear as well.
And I also found that a little bit confusing. I'm just wondering if this is the definition, if then agencies that are prenatal to 5 would be required to provide some sort of training that goes to age 8. Would that ever be the intent of defining it this way?
No, I think that this is just saying that the competencies that could be accepted within the system could cover those. I mean, the intention is really to make sure that it's broad enough to encompass the competencies that exist in our system, not to require that agencies do anything specifically.
Sydney, I was just thinking that I think a little bit of that language around competencies comes through the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which identifies birth through age 8 in their, the scope of how their competencies apply to educators of young children. But I still think we can look at how do we make this less confusing for people who are, trying to think about it. But I think it was probably in alignment to the NACE standards and competencies.
Thanks, John. All right. Oregon's core knowledge categories, or CKCs, means the subject matter areas as defined by the Oregon Center for Career Development and Early Childhood Care and Education that organize training and professional development for the early learning workforce. Trainings are classified by core knowledge category for the purposes of approval, workforce registry documentation, licensing requirements, and professional development tracking. I believe that's a standing existing, not within rule definition, but a definition that's been used in the system broadly. I still see some thinking faces, so I'm going to give it a minute. It's a long one. Yeah, Ty.
I always had a question about this. What is defined in this as the difference between professional development and training? So it's that organized training and professional development. What's the difference here?
I think that Heather could probably answer for the existing system. For our system moving forward, we will have this kind of blanket definition of professional development rather than specifically just training and higher education as our system exists now. And so this definition really supports the expansion of what we call professional development and accept in our system. But Heather, I don't know if you want to speak to existing.
I think what it is an opportunity to not have to change this again later by including training and professional development both. So once we move away from training only identified in that way and transitioning to professional development, then we have the opportunity to grow it and expand it without being locked into just training.
We have been making movement towards that even in the last year as you look at documents that come out and areas in Oro itself, the language has been changed from training hours to professional development hours in preparation of kind of expanding our thinking. Any other thoughts on this one? Okay, we have more definitions to go. This one is definition heavy. I don't imagine there's a lot of comments on this one. Department or DELC means the Department of Early Learning and Care. I don't think anybody can argue that. That's what I mean. If you have something you want to say about that, I welcome it, but I'm going to skip over that one for now. Early childhood education, higher education means degrees, certifications, and post-secondary coursework credits of early care and education, including but not limited to early childhood education, child development, human development, elementary education, human ecology, home economics, family and consumer studies, child and family studies, education, and special education, early intervention. I want to note, one, that this is an expanded list, and two, excuse me, that if you look at the following definition, we are expanding the definitions that are kind of approved within the system to also include these related professions. So this list may seem new to people because we really are making an effort to kind of expand what's included when we talk about training, professional development, degrees, all of those that are related and provide benefit to early childhood education positions. Yeah, Tiffany.
Sorry, I spent a lot of time going through this, so
That's wonderful.
And to jump ahead kind of to the either education related professions or education work experience, is there thought about adding director or administrative roles? These are kind of very specific to those in the classroom. However, I think it's important to note those that have been in the programs doing the admin side that maybe aren't directly in the classroom, but are providing those services, going through kind of everything in the family support. So just making sure that that component is added as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sydney, in the chat, we have a comment from Jessica, wondering if we can use the children who are 0 through 6 years of age or those in out of school time care for the previous definition that was unclear.
And this is also jumping ahead, but the number 8 says the same thing, but then it adds up to age 12. I just think we should have some consistency. Like, are we going to say 0 through 8 and those in out of school time care up to age 12, or 0 through 6 and those in out of time, without an upper age limit, especially if we're discussing children with, disabilities. I feel like we just need some consistency.
Agreed. Thank you, Jessica. Vanessa?
I know it, sorry. I know it says included but not limited to in the related professions, but I feel like it needs to be called out somewhere only because there has been some inconsistencies with like Oro and OCCD accepting trainings that are not necessarily marked as early childhood. So a perfect example is my employee is a behavioral therapist and an ABA technician, and none of her trainings have been accepted through Oro or through OCCD. So like in our union contract related to our scholarship, we called out specific fields of study, including those because there are people who do work in the ECE realm as far as family child care and center care that, fall under occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, ABA services, behavioral therapies that are kind of being left out of gaining steps and advancing in that side of the career path because there's not a explicit definition or rule or policy saying that their trainings qualify for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe that we did look at the union list in thinking about this, but we can take a look at it again. What I remember is that we were kind of trying to get to those other things by including this mental health kind of definition that a lot of those would fit under, but it bears thinking about if there's anything missing from that list that the union has that doesn't have a title here that kind of overarchingly describes that. And then we can also think more specifically about those individual degrees within these blankets during the documentation and
Yeah, I don't think our current, we haven't ratified our most recent contract, which is where we added
oh, okay.
the like explicit lists that like names out those degree fields or those career fields.
Yeah, I did
I mean,
see a
yeah,
copy of it.
technically mental health and healthcare cover those, but there definitely, I think, needs to be like a master list that, I mean, you're never gonna cover every possible degree field, but it needs to be able to be looked at for sure.
Absolutely. And I think for me, that falls under that clear and posted documentation. And so as we go through this process, that will include engagement with the union continued, as well as, you know, the groups that you all represent here. We can, you know, create that list and think about the weights and, you know, the points for those different things, and ensure that those are on the publicly posted list. I did see the non-ratified draft of that list, but it may have changed since then because that was a while back. So we can, once that's ratified, we can also look at that, which should happen within this time period that we have time to make edits. So, Ty.
I was just wondering for I have two, but the first one is for number 6. And I was wondering about um, if there would be room to include language about anti-bias education as this list that we have, like human development, elementary, human, like all of the different things. I think specifically in like when we're talking about these types of definitions that are going to be aligned with like licensing and things like that, that kind of language is really important, and that it's not one of those implied, because I know it says but not limited to, but I think something that has to do with anti-bias education and that type of work, because that it's its own beast we are. But that absolutely should be included for our providers, especially because it's required in that 15 hours for them to get that type of training too. It's just not labeled that. That's the first one. And then the second one was for the early childhood education work experience means time spent providing. Sorry, I'm one of those people. I got ADHD. I read stuff back. I apologize.
Okay.
Means time spent providing learning experiences and a range of early childhood services. Oh, maybe it's there. I was wondering about it including people who that work experience also includes people who are supporting those providing learning experiences.
Yeah, that was our intention to include
Okay.
technical assistance specialists, trainers, providers, trainers, coaches, all of those groups. And I appreciate you reading things back because it helps me be able to listen to you and also know the language that you're talking about. So, and I love your first point too, including that anti-bias. I think that's really important for our system and making sure that we find a way to identify that in here. It's valued in the system. Vanessa, do you have another question or is your hand or comment or is your hand still raised?
Sorry, I forgot to lower it.
That's okay.
Sydney, I'm going to catch us up with some of the comments in the chat. So earlier, Annalise shared support for including and recognizing the admin side. Also for FCC should recognize the business side of childcare because care and learning is only half of what we do. Tiffany shared, I agree with Vanessa, especially with the onset of ECB, it will be important to highlight other inclusive services. Robert shared regarding number 6, Tiffany, I agree, including not limited to is helpful. However, explicitly stating early childhood public administration and/or finance has the potential to contribute to a highly qualified workforce. Mercedes shared to stay current with the healthcare sector language, might want to consider behavioral and physical healthcare I believe OHA has grouped all mental health under the behavioral health division. And then Sandy shared, I have had 3 staff who have joined our program who held a master's in non-childcare related fields, but they wanted a change in their career. Their step level came back as a 1 through Oro because they didn't have relevant education to early childhood. I think it would definitely be helpful for employers to have an understanding of step levels before hiring and knowing what other education could be relevant. And so that's the catch up with the chat.
Thank you. Vanessa?
I did raise my hand again. Another field that might need to be added to that is nutrition. As I mean, that's a huge part of family childcare and center childcare is the nutrition of those littles.
Yeah, I wonder if that could be under healthcare or not. I have to think that through.
Yeah, I mean, technically nutrition services falls under that, but in a sense of like meal prep and stuff, it wouldn't fall under healthcare. So, but that's another, my employee is multifaceted and she has a master's degree in nutrition, and Oro rejected that because it's not in an early childhood related field, but it's still very relevant to what we do as early childhood providers.
Yeah. Well, in relationship to that one, and also Annalise's comment, Annalise, we have been exploring, because we've had previous conversations about how we can make sure to include those kind of business practices in here. One of the challenges I think about is really making this system simple and clear to understand, and that when we get into those specific roles, in some ways it necessitates having different pathways. So that's something that I think we'll need to think through a lot in the implementation pieces of this. Like, what does it look like if you have an infant toddler teacher who has a master's in business but not other elements in ECE? And as we look at it tomorrow, some of that will be taken care of because of the considering a requirement of for certain levels having multiple different types of professional development, and so that would ensure that there was some sort of ECE, even if that was their degree pathway. But it's something to think about, kind of both ideologically and also practically, in making it a really simple and streamlined, understandable process. So it's something to definitely continue to think about, and we'll see what we can include in here that we can kind of tie ourselves to with certainty at this point, and then continue to explore in the documentation and implementation of this in the coming months.
I do want to take just a moment to acknowledge a time warp we may all be feeling, that we have gone beyond 25 minutes for definitions, but we were shorter in our other ones. So we have some more time to talk about definitions. But if anyone was feeling that time was going fast and then slow, it is technically.
We are really excited about this education work experience one. That's something that people nationally have been trying to incorporate into their systems, and having a lot of pushback around incorporating that. So we are very excited to, it seems, because I didn't hear any negative feedback around this, be in kind of a community that supports that as well. And then we'll, again, look through like, how highly valued is that in the system, what the documentation requirements, because that's the piece where it gets kind of complicated, and we don't want to create more barriers in terms of documentation. So any other comments on the ones on this page? All right. I think this is our last definitions one. I could be wrong. Yeah, it is. Okay, thanks, Sierra. Early Childhood Education Workforce Registry database, or Oregon Registry Online. ORO is a statewide database that stores all submitted training and education information for Oregon's child care and education professionals. I'll read the next one, and if you want me to come back to that one, I certainly can. Early learning workforce member means those individuals employed or seeking employment in the provision of services to children who are 0 to 6 years of age or those in out-of-school time care. So this one, again, we need to find that consistency in that piece of it. So we'll work on that. Any other thoughts on this one? Sandy?
Hi, I'm Sandy. I'm the program manager for Montessori Preschool here in Southeast Portland. And we have Preschool Promise and Preschool for All children enrolled. And then just a comment on number 9. It's got kind of 2, like early childhood education and then Oregon Registry Online. Is it possible to just have one sort of name for that? I know in our program we use Oro a lot. But if I was to use the other one, the other early childhood education workforce registry database is extremely long and I think can get confusing when you're talking about this, the database. Just a comment.
Yeah, we certainly can look into that. One thing that I think about is that, I mean, quite frankly, not a lot of people are actually going to be going and reading and using these rules for, in daily practice. It's really going to be the language that we use in our documentation and practice. But we certainly can think about simplifying within the definitions too. Kate?
Hi, Kate Dennison, Government Affairs Manager for DELC. I think one reason why we use the lengthier early childhood education workforce registry database language is because that's what's in the statute. And so we wanted to clarify what it means as oral in this rule. But Annalise's suggestion in the chat to use instead of or to use also known as might work as well. But I think that is why that very lengthy phrase is in there.
Thanks, Kate. We've been working on these rules for quite some time, and sometimes I forget where those decisions came from. So I appreciate all the brains helping me remember.
I also think, just real briefly, that if we chose to ever rename it, it's always going to reflect back to the national, the container is the workforce registry database, but if for some reason it ever changed a name, we wouldn't have to go back and change a rule just for a name. But I love the also known as.
Jessica also put in the chat that she seconds Annalise's suggestion. And then Heather adds, should we, the new database that is being developed, that will be used statewide?
Yeah, I think you're talking about ELMS, and it makes a good point that we could put some word in here that indicates the originating because yes, ELMS will hold information about training, but it won't be the place where that data originates from. Oro will be sending that information into ELMS. So we could add some language to clarify that. All right. Higher education related degree really kind of mirrors the related one that we saw on the other slide. So we have kind of mirroring definitions for higher education degree and also kind of the experience. So they're very similar. Again, align that 0 to 6 out of school time care. Yeah, Mercedes.
I'm wondering why there's these two with the higher education related degree and then the early childhood education, higher education.
Yeah.
When are we using these different?
It's the same. So there are, this definition of related professions kind of expands the types of professions that could be included in the system, and the same thing is mirrored in the higher education degrees. So there's these degrees that are related directly to ECE, and then these related ones. And I think their reason for that is to leave the door open to value those in different ways. So if it's specifically ECE related, maybe that has a higher point value than something that is related. and not directly ECE. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do that once we go into the implementation, but it does leave the door open to that and like give us the language to be able to do that. Heather, I don't know if there's anything you would add to that.
No, we're still working out the details. We are referencing what other states are incorporating to see kind of what the trends are. But I think ours is going to be a lot more inclusive than what other states are using.
Yeah, as happens with many of our projects of the Department of Learning and Care, when we go and do our research at other states, they are not yet doing the ambitious things that we're trying to do, like, you know, including experience and expanding those lists of accepted professional development. So we get to be pioneers yet again. John?
And Heather can correct me if I'm wrong, but we already have a distinction between ECE degrees and then related degrees in our system. And I think or related professions in this case, I think what we're really trying to do is expand that number of things that come into the fold in the related degrees, because you know, they may not be specifically an ECE degree because those are fairly prescribed. But I think we're really trying to get at, there's a lot of qualifications that can fall into the related professions that we aren't capturing now that we need to. And I think that's why they separated it, so that we can get that container expanded. I feel like I might
Any
not be nailing
clarification
that, but
from you, Heather?
No, that's exactly right.
Okay,
We
perfect.
want to make sure that people who are supporting children in all capacities get recognized for their education and the work they're doing.
Thank you. Tiffany?
I kind of put it in the chat, but just kind of wanted to, I guess, expand on my thought. So perhaps changing the language from higher education related degree to just higher education. That way there's not that narrow interpretation of it, and it can include anything that's really recognized by the Higher Education Commission. And so including like community colleges and things like that. So maybe just adjusting the language a little bit from higher education related degree to just higher education, and kind of adjusting it that way. I'm not sure if that's the direction, if I'm misinterpreting it, but that was kind of my thoughts on it.
I think that there are some degrees that we would not include in the registry system. So, for example, electrician, or, you know,
I
that's
think
probably not something we would credit in the ECE system. And so I think that's why it's defined that.
so. I'm sorry for clarification, like my kind of thought process on this is, I have several educators that I work with who don't have the degree, but have tons of just coursework. And so I think by reducing the word degree in there, creates a little bit broader spectrum for that. And it doesn't silo it to just degrees. I know that we have in the language that it includes coursework, but just removing that word degree, I opens it up a little bit for clarity.
Yeah, we might put some other word there, higher education related coursework or experience or something like that. I see what you're saying. Yeah, thank you. Mercedes.
I just wanted to support that because in the definition itself, you say coursework and certifications, which are explicitly not degrees. So I think by making it related degrees, but then saying you actually don't have to have a degree to fall into the category with degrees, I think it's confusing.
Thank you. Yeah. John, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was trying to find a thumbs up.
Oh. Sierra's point made, your technical challenges. All right, Karina.
Yeah, I just want to be conscious of the time. We have about 3 to 4 minutes left on this topic.
Okay. All right. So I think we're on to mentoring means peer-to-peer professional learning relationship focused on transfer to practice and reflection consultation. Oh, my son would be so disappointed. He's practicing reading with commas and I did not do that well. But you know what I mean. Tiffany.
So I'll be quick, but I have a lot of thoughts on this one, just from kind of the apprenticeship side. The definition of mentor, I think it's important that we consider how mentorship is understood. In a lot of programs, mentors are identified simply by just the time in the field rather than by demonstrated skill or kind of training or reflective practice. It's something we see where a lot of our mentors really, they just have been there longer than our apprentices and their skill level or their strengths aren't equal. And so we just kind of want to, I think we probably want to look at how we're really defining that as somebody and how we're judging how that competency and professionalism and the ability to support others' growth is really calculated and clarified within that definition.
Yeah. I think that we can consider that. I think in my mind, it's similar to the definition of coaching in that when we get to the documentation requirements, we can further define that. And that may take more engagement because, as you said, like there is this definition of mentor in apprenticeship that is a lot more strict about what that means. And so we do have to have some continued conversation about like, is there training required to get credit for mentoring, or what level do we want to accept that at? And we're continuing in that conversation over the next year to think about the balance between creating barriers and being able to provide and receive that professional development, and also making sure that we're valuing something that is actually going to contribute to furthering a person's professional development. So yeah, if you think of language that would be still broad enough to make those determinations, but seems more clear to you, I would welcome that. John, that's exactly what you just wrote, huh? Yep, we've been working together too long, I think. All right. So this Oregon Registry definition is distinctly different from ORO. And this is something that we struggle with kind of in the general nomenclature in the system in general. ORO is not OCCD and ORO is not the registry. ORO is the actual technology database. And the registry that we're talking about right now is basically is the other services, the career lattice and those other pieces. So I'm going to read this one out for you. Oregon Registry or Workforce Registry means a voluntary statewide registry that documents and verifies the education, training, or experience of early childhood care and professionals to support professional development and career growth. It provides a structured pathway to document and share their professionals' progress. The Oregon Registry Online is one tool within the Oregon Registry to support child care and education professionals to document their career growth and professional development. And it's occurring to me now, we may want to mirror that ORO or if we maintain that in the other definition of ORO. And I see a note, ORO is not voluntary in practice for most of us. So we can try and make some distinction there for it being voluntary for some and not for others, because we are thinking very broadly about the workforce. And so it is a subset that it's required in practice for. Yeah, Mercedes.
I do think it's important to acknowledge where things may not be voluntary, and also this this can control people's wages, right? And so it's actually highly consequential. And so I think it's important that it be stated in the definition that people's like professional career pathways and professional development are heavily like influenced or even controlled by whether or not the system works with them against them or for them, right? Like, and so I think it's important to have that weight in here, because when we start then looking at those other pieces that come after the definitions of how we put this in practice, I think if we treat it like it's a passive engagement, then that's when we put more of the documentation burden on the individual person. Because like it's, hey, it's up to you. We're not making you do this. It's not required of you if you want to. And that's why all the pressure is on you to figure it out. And us as the system don't have those obligations. But since we're clearly trying to change that and have a much more collaborative space with regulator and provider, I think that we want to make sure that we have definitions that have that kind of weight to it. And so maybe even just calling out where it's not voluntary, or where it is effectively a decision space. Like if you don't get the right steps out of this system, you will not get the wages and the positions that are actually equivalent to the real education you have, because the registry doesn't recognize it.
In some situations, yeah. I think, and Heather put that clarification that it's the career lattice that is optional, and I don't know if that's, I understand that is connected to the wages. I don't know. I want to make sure that you were saying that that is the element that we need to clarify when it is optional or not, because the career lattice itself is at the moment always optional. But and I don't think we would make the decision in this rule to make it required for anybody, because that's kind of a bigger system implication. But we can add, we'll think that one through and think about how we can adjust that one. I think I need some more time to think it all the way through. Kate?
For time, we are going to need to move on to the next section, so maybe John can be the last one to comment. If there's time tomorrow, we can circle back to definitions, but you also can submit written public comment if you have more ideas you want to share, so I'll put that public comment form in the chat again.
Yeah, and I do want to come back, and maybe you can make note of this, Kate. I do want to come back to tribal knowledge and experience, and I think tomorrow would be a good day to do that, because one of our tribal members of this group was not able to be here today, and they will be tomorrow. So let's come back to that one tomorrow. John?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in sort of in closing, what I was hearing Mercedes reference is that even though the pathways are voluntary, they're very tied to a way for people to get their qualifications quantified so that they can get higher paid jobs. So kind of putting some weight in on the importance of that area. We can go back and look at revising so it reflects that. So I just wanted to say, like,
yeah,
I caught the nuance, and I think we can try to work on that.
Thanks, John. All right. So this is just a note that tomorrow we're going to talk about this career pathways one, because it's very large. Foreign language translation.
And I'm going to pause right there. We have about 12 minutes to talk about foreign language translation.
And I see your note in there, Annalise, for those that don't work through the other available pathways in licensing, then a registry step may be the only option. Yeah. So foreign language translation. The Oregon Registry shall develop and implement a process for receiving and translating into English any applications and documentation related to professional development submitted under these rules. The Oregon Registry shall not charge early childhood workforce members for translation of these documents. The Oregon Registry shall allow an early childhood workforce member to submit documents either directly or through a representative authorized by the early childhood workforce member. So this last one in there is the intention of, like, maybe they have their employer submit that on their behalf or something like that, as we're trying to kind of expand the ability of employers to support their staff in their professional development submitting. And then we want to make sure that there's no charge, that that's a free service. And then we did put the provision that, like, these should be related to professional development and to the registry practices, because we aren't in the business of translating things that are not for the purpose of ECE, right? Sandy.
Hi. So just on I've had personal experience with this. So it says translating into English. I mean, I've come from UK, so I moved here 3 years ago, and I had to still go through the process of getting all my documents kind of translated to what they recognize here. So getting all my certifications, all my transcript looked at, which took a long time, but I didn't have any information or any sort of starting point on how to do that. So yeah, just a comment on that I had to get that all transferred over to here for then me to upload that certificate to get a step level.
And as a clarification, our next rule is going to be more about degree evaluation. This is strictly language translation.
Okay.
So, and I know that's confusing because
Mhm.
people use that same translation language in terms
Yeah.
of degree evaluation. Yeah. But keep that, what you experienced in mind when we look at this one. Any other thoughts on this one?
In the chat, Robert shared, I recommend ensuring translation covers training certificates and college transcripts for staff with international credentials.
And do you think that there's specific language that needs to be added there, or do you think that's covered under being related to professional development?
I don't know.
Okay.
Perhaps as we move on, it will be made clear. We've also gone through processes where it's been really difficult to get foreign, especially if not in English, documentation to be recognized.
Yeah. And just because I have this audience here, I'm going to make sure that everybody is aware that the Early Learning Degree Pathway Scholarship and other scholarships at OCCD that cover evaluation of transcripts will also cover the cost of translating into English as well. And I think there's not a lot of awareness of that. So just know that for the future. That's kind of a side note, but that is available. We want it to be free regardless of whether or not you have a scholarship, and that's what this one's about. But and also outside of degrees too, just any professional development or documentation of any kind. So for example, we're including mentoring and coaching in this definition of professional development. And so if someone received coaching in another country and their documentation of that is in another language, that would also be able to be translated. Other thoughts on this one? Yeah, Tiffany.
I would only suggest that we consider language to say that they're going to develop and implement processes in multiple languages, so that it's clear that the actual how-to will be available to everybody in that kind of first line. Yes, they can develop and implement process, but what is that, is that going to be available? Is that process going to be available to multiple people, or is it going to be just English and Spanish, or what is that exactly going to look like? So making sure that that process is available to everybody, I think is important.
And then Kate, if you can make a note that I think that probably the most appropriate place for that is in our original one when we were talking about the documentation of these processes, so that it applies to all of these things and not just this one. Because we want all those processes to be available to people. All right. Verifying out-of-state professional development. And I want to, oh, we did add clarification in there. Never mind, we're good. The Oregon Registry shall maintain a streamlined process that allows the early learning workforce to use out-of-state or international training, degrees, certifications, coursework, and credentials to document their professional development in the Early Childhood Education Workforce Registry database. We might, based on what I just said 2 minutes ago, expand this to include just kind of general professional development because of coaching and mentoring and those other things that might be able to be submitted from other places. Mercedes?
For this one, I think it would be helpful to include that that these processes and how to access them, funding that can be available to support this process will also be made available like on public websites and information to employers. Because I think that that is part of, I think part of what Tiffany was mentioning before, like what languages are these in, right? I think it's also that it's one thing for the system to like have these systems in place, but like kind of the advertising of those processes and what people should be able to expect and where to like submit questions, I also think is really important. And um in order for like it to actually be an accessible process, because I could see you developing something that like some people know how to use and then other people didn't realize, oh, I could have done that. But if it's something that is that part of the requirement is to also like be publishing what those processes are for technical assistance, I think that would be really helpful.
Is there, I'm going to go back to this other language because again, I think that fits within this other section. Are there elements, what are the elements that are missing in this language here that would help facilitate covering all of those things? I mean, we know we're going to add language in there because we discussed that, but.
I guess so when you say you're going to publish a process, what does that mean to you?
That it be available on the probably OCCD's public facing website, possibly ours at DELC as well. We could, it sounds like maybe clarify what published means. I think originally we had some language about outward facing website or something like that in here. So that's something that we could consider putting back in if you think that would be.
And then, yeah, and I would also say then, because this is specifically about how to like, that the registry will have these processes, I think part of that is also, if I'm going to start this process, like where is, I guess, where is that? Is that happening through Oro? Because then it should be published there. Do I go to the OCCD website? Is that the only place to start this process? Then it would make sense to have it published there. I think published should also include information to employers so that they have that information as well, whether that's through like email communication or as part of other ways that you reach out to providers, as opposed to just like when we come to your website looking for information, like how do we make sure that it's something that's part of that process as well?
Okay, I'll think through that more later. I'm thinking through how we would ensure to notify new program, because we can do a push, of course, and notify everyone when this is published, but how we notify new programs, the only mechanism I can think is through licensing. And so we would need to have conversations with them about, I know I've had conversations with them in the past about how many documents new programs receive and how a lot of that information is lost because it's all kind of given at the same time. And so I would want it to be as effective as possible. So we'll have to think through ways to ensure that that information is out there, and what at this point we could add to the language to clarify that before we have all those details worked out. So we'll think some more on that one.
And I think that's my concern as well, is that like, because there is so much information on the website, like just like it's published on the website isn't always meaning that the information is getting, especially because it's also going to be new processes. So what we're going to have is we're going to probably have like a lot of advertisement about it in the initial phases of like, here are the new processes. And then after about 6 months, we'll all forget that that happened and we did that. And then we have new professionals coming into the space that are being told by existing professionals in the space, like, oh no, you have to go to your consulate and you have to get it notarized and you have to pay them for it. And then you have to, because they're going to be teaching each other the way it used to be. And like, that's the kind of thing I'm trying to figure out. How do we support that not being like, that's always going to happen, but how do we support that not being the way that people continue to perpetuate an old system in the face of a new one?
Yeah, I mean, as evidenced by that scholarship being available for those services and not being used. I mean, we have mechanisms through the CCRNR, although we know that not all providers are accessing CCRNR services. So, Tiffany, speaking of CCRNRs.
I was just about to say that making sure that the CCRNRs are trained on that and know the process very well. Also offering, statewide trainings and things like that, I think especially are going to be helpful if you can do an asynchronous one. But on a side note, for the administration, and I kind of had put it in a later point, but I think it can be both, that explaining exactly how documentation is being reviewed and verified and weighted is going to be important for everybody, especially for out of states. Like for my own personal self, I moved from Texas, and Texas is its own kind of wild and craziness. And all of my trainings from Texas are like set one to no set. And so how, what those equivalency standards are, and especially as we look at international trainings, keeping that in mind, too, just the equitable standards of different communities and different countries and everybody, that, what their standards are, aren't necessarily going to be what Oregon standards are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're worth less. And so making sure that we have a very clear process on how that's being weighted, and it's very transparent, I think, is one of kind of the biggest things that needs to be focused on as far as any training. And
yeah, what I'm hearing is that adding something in here that indicates that it will be provided, not only be recorded in the database, but also in the registry, like in the career lattice, and count towards that. Because right now, as you said, it does come in as like set 0, which is documented in the registry database, but it does not move you forward on the career lattice. So indicating that.
And, I think it goes to the word streamlined. I think that's a very like vague word. And so because it's not explaining really anything. Like streamlined can mean different things to so many different people. So if we specified what that streamlined process meant in practice, whether that's recognition or training standards or however that looks, but just kind of redefining what that streamlined process is instead of just using it as a vague overage, I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, some of it goes to what I said before about like, we want to make sure that that process is a good one. And so we don't want to rush creating it now without the continued, feedback. There may be some way that we can say, you said something about, that there will be, you said a different word, but like a procedure document.
Like an equitable and transparent process instead of streamlined.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Kate, I kept talking because I knew you were probably going to tell me I was out of time.
I just wanted to read out loud comments in the chat. So Sandy agreed with Mercedes earlier. Kate Dennison suggested maybe through the licensing process. Tiffany had said a required licensing training like IRFCC would be helpful. And Karen had shared having changes sent out to email accounts connected with Oro accounts would be helpful.
Yeah, for new Oro accounts, it's possible we could do some kind of like automatic email out. It again would be a long email because it's more than just that process that we would want to share if we started something like that. But yeah, I think that's a possibility for sure. All right. Any other thoughts on this one? Okay. Training record access. This is one that we have heard a lot about for a long time. Oro OCCD used to be more of a manual paper document process. And so like a director could kind of send in the documents, and now it's very tied to the specific individual. And that's created a barrier in employers being able to support their staff in uploading things and kind of seeing what's going on with their staff, which can have implications on their ability to remain licensed. So the language says the department may require the Oregon Registry to develop a process for employer access to an early learning workforce member's records in the Early Childhood Education Workforce Registry database. Employer access may be used for the purposes of providing technical assistance to an early learning workforce member, and employer access may only be granted with the written permission of the early learning workforce member. We have some FERPA concerns, especially because it's in a university, but just because it's training in general, that we need to make sure that there is permission, just like if you were going to share your medical records with HIPAA, you need to give permission to be able to do that. Vanessa.
And just as there's a process to grant permission, there's going to be a process to remove permission.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. Process to
Okay.
remove permission as well. Yeah. We did think about that in this process, but we should make sure that that language is in this final version. Thank you. Annalise.
So I have lots of thoughts about this. I'm sure that's not surprising to anyone. I think the department should require the Oregon Registry to develop a process. I understand why you're using the word may, but I don't think that's, I don't think that language is strong enough. I think it should, the department should require, or the department requires the Oregon Registry to develop a process. Employer access may be used for the purpose of providing technical assistance to an early learning workforce member. I understand that these rules probably will never be enforced, but I think that that rule is deceptive and it is disingenuous at best. Employer access, the primary reason that employers want access is because we are tired and quite frankly just over having the licensing rules enforced against us when we have no, in some cases, no or insufficient access to know that someone has not completed their trainings as required. And I understand, you know, wanting to keep things for someone, for an employee, wanting to not have their employer have access, but the reality is that that's not the world we live in. You cannot enforce against an employer, against a licensed program who has no access to their employees' materials. And quite frankly, 60 days prior to a renewal, I get this document from licensing that states that my employee has no hours for the year in training. And I don't provide that training necessarily to that employee. I have, you know, they can go to CCR&R, they can go to private trainers, they can, you know, access care courses, whatever. That's not, that is 60 days is not enough time to get an employee the training they need to be licensed compliant. And employer access may only be granted with permission of the early learning workforce member. Here, you know, here's the thing, right? This is trying to move from one extreme to the other. And here's what my thought is. There is absolutely no reason that we need full access to somebody's Oro account. And what I would suggest is that what is currently available, if I call my licensing specialist and I ask for that paperwork for each of my employees to verify what is necessary for licensing renewal, there is no reason that employers, licensed programs can't have that same access anytime, right? So I think this is well-intentioned, but I do not think that the necessary thought has gone into this rule. And I would suggest a major revamp because it's doing too much, but not enough at the same time.
Unmuted. I agree with the May in the first one for sure. The last note, I had a thought on that. I think that's entirely, I think that's entirely possible. I think the thinking with this was expanding what is available to see past that current documentation, because in that documentation, you can see kind of generally what was taken, but you can't tell which trainings are missing to help support your staff to get that submitted. But if it seems like generally that's not as much of an issue, then yes, we can make sure that that documentation that's currently available is available in more of a live way and accessible, you know. And I think there's some work to look at that in general with the ELMS pieces as well, because there's work to provide access in some ways for employers to that system. And so there could be connection there with the information porting from Oro.
Thank you for that, Sydney. I just, a caveat, right? Feeding, in response to what you said in response to me, here's the thing, right? If my employee wants help, then they generally will print off their professional development statement and bring it to me, and then we can sit down and take a look at it. I don't need access. If my employee wants help, they're going to provide the information so that I can help them. I think why licensed programs need access is so that we're not having to say to an employee, oh, you don't have what you need. You can't get what you need in time. And so now I've got to furlough you or lay you off until after my licensing visit. And then we can, revisit and you can start working again when you get what you need. And let's face it, staff are short, right? We're all short staff. There's not enough workforce right now. So that's not a practical consideration that we have, that we can just lay somebody off for a month or two 3 months while they figure out training. So I think again, I just want to say, I think this kind of misses the mark for what's needed. I don't need a full professional development statement. I don't care unless the employee brings it to me and says, can you help me out?
Thank you. Yeah, don't want to be blindsided. Vanessa, did you still have something you wanted to say? I saw your hand up for a second. No.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I'm nursing my baby and he grabbed my phone and raised my hand.
Does the baby want to share something? No, thank you.
I don't think so. He's currently eating, but
didn't want to catch him with his mouth full, sorry. Mercedes, I just wanted to ask you, because you worked on the workforce barriers report, if there is anything that and I'm putting you on the spot, so if you can't think of anything, that's fine. If there's anything that you remember around this topic that came up in that report.
Yeah, so some of these were around employer access to deal with technical assistance. So things like for multilingual non-native English speakers to be able to review the system and identify issues alongside with them. Reduce times for documentation processing. I think this was kind of a question of like, if I can see that it's in there and we're just waiting for someone to verify it, then at least I know you did it. And then the other one was for trainers and employers to actually be able to submit information. So this seems like it's not necessarily identifying that, it's just being able to view it. So still not necessarily being able to help correct records if there's something missing, which was one of the things that came up. And then being able to have like one-on-one support within the system itself, kind of like trying to navigate the online tool to support updating the steps and accreditations as necessary. So I think some of it, what we were seeing in the request during the study was really thinking about how are we making sure that things are getting done properly within the system so that it's being recognized, and allowing an employer to be able to review that and provide that support to the employee. I'll look through the notes and see if I can find anything else on the same topic.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the point one was trying to get to that. And the reason that it isn't more specific is because we have to figure out what the technology is capable of and make sure that we've covered all of those FERPA bases. Like, can we create what lift is it going to be to create an entire new role in the system for an employer to be able to see into the record, but also be their own person. So like not go in as that person, but have their own separate role. And just on the back end too, we've been having conversations about bulk submittal from larger organizations that do training, and also the potential for having a dashboard for everyone to be able to see where in the process documents are. So that's kind of like there's a view into the system that way. So those are other things we're thinking about. But Annalise, I take that point as well, and thinking about adding some language beyond technical assistance into this. So we'll think about how to keep that. The may in number 1. So again, I agree with this may in the first one. Like, we are going to require them to develop a process. So we don't need to say may there. We're going to do that. The may in this one is not we may allow it. It's that an employer may access it if they want to, but we're not going to make them access it. So that's what that may is more about. John?
As the conversation has gone on, I think we're getting closer to some areas where we can maybe enhance it to get it where Annalise was going. But I also wanted to clarify, Annalise, like you were saying you wouldn't necessarily take the deeper dive to go in and update information unless an employee was seeking your support, which is great. And then we can have the container in here for that. But I think you were responding to there could be a middle ground of there should be ready, somewhat of a kind of where Sydney was going with the dashboard. There'd be readily available information or a way to be able to look at what's in the system right now, so you're not caught by surprise at the 60-day mark. I mean, is having a rule in here that gets at that, is that hitting where you were going, or am I missing another piece of it?
Thanks, John. I was just putting in a comment, I guess I'm an employer. I see it a little bit differently. Plus our union has some of these things, right? Like providers that want help and technical assistance. And, I think one of the other things that's huge as an employer and as a union representative is it's not that it's not that I want access or that I think it would be helpful to have access to that employee's account, because I can either sit down with them and they can pull it up, or they can print something off, or or I'm going to send them to Oro to get, or to OCCD, right, to get that help if they need that kind of technical assistance. But simply being able to upload a certificate for someone would be, in my mind, and in practice, would be so much more beneficial than having access to an Oro account. And to be honest, if someone's wanting assistance with steps and all of that, again, they can print the materials off, or quite frankly, the union and myself as an employer with a handful of employees, I'm sending those folks back to OCCD and Oro to get that help, because that is literally the role that was created for those employees at Oro and OCCD is that sort of technical assistance. So I feel like that is also a system issue where myself as an employer or as a union representative is being asked to do something which is supposed to be already existing and built into the system.
Yeah, I take that point. I think specifically for the populations that Mercedes talking about that might speak languages other than English, what we've heard from CCRNRs is that having that kind of side-by-side walkthrough is a lot more beneficial. Like even with someone at OCCD that speaks that language, and for anyone that needs some technical assistance, right? Having that ability to sit right next to them and kind of see, and I see Karen that also works for CCRNR kind of nodding her head, so maybe you want to weigh in, Karen, as well. But I think that there are multiple things going on here. There are multiple needs from different communities. There's the TA need, and then there's also the data access need and the ability to upload things. So I think what we need to do is try and make sure that this reflects all of those needs as much as possible. Yeah, Tiffany.
Just for the purpose of the RAC and looking at the language, and I kind of dropped it in the chat, but just wanted to say, I think one, instead of employer, it needs to be employer and or authorized training partner, just for clarification. And then I think a really simple way to kind of clarify this would be to adjust the language to just say having access to relevant records. And then that way down the road, we can really look at what those relevant records are, right? So they don't need to know everything, but as an employer or as a union member or as a whomever, they really just need a specific set of records. And yes, it'll go back to dependent on what the system can do. But it could be a pretty simple coding process in terms of when that training is being entered on whether it's eligible for, whether it's directly related to licensing or however that looks, so that it can populate in specific areas for people to see. So I think it's just a matter of adjusting some of the language to be a little broader, again, removing just like technical assistance and just putting in relevant training or relevant information could bypass some of these issues that Annalise and other educators are experiencing.
Thank you. This is our last one. We've got about 10 minutes left. Any other thoughts on this one? Our last one for today. Tomorrow we will have more. Annalise.
I just also want to raise one last issue.
Yeah.
It isn't just about uploading certificates. And I'm going to put OCCD Oro on the spot this morning. There's been some recent developments where an employer or a trainer partner may need to upload or provide documentation to prove the truth of what is being asserted for a training. In other words, like a syllabus, or apparently in the example of Faye Zappetta's CPR and first aid classes, that now either the provider or the trainer or the employer is going to have to provide some kind of photograph or additional documentation to prove that the provider or the CPR or first aid person, in this case, Faye Zappetta, is actually doing the live practice with the dummies. So I just want to say that this isn't just about uploading certificates. This is about a system which is now questioning the integrity of trainers and childcare providers on a larger scale than I've seen in the past 10 years. And that I think information is going to need to flow from multiple pathways to ensure that trainings are accepted and counted and to validate that the truth of what is being submitted.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, just as a side note, Annalise, that's an ongoing conversation. I know that there's a conversation happening today about like in
Yeah, and
10
I
minutes
think
about
that
that. Um,
yeah, I
and
think that needs to, I think there needs to be some sort of maybe broader meeting with the union and with Faye and with Oro and with Delk, and we need to figure this out.
Yeah, I agree. And also it's very intrinsically connected to a licensing rule. So I just want to make sure, Delk needs to be at that meeting. It's not on all on Oro for that piece.
Yes,
But
certainly.
I take your point to connecting it here to ensuring that even though training was submitted, that it was actually accepted through the system. So that's a key element here. Mercedes?
Yeah, I just wanted to share. So I did put in the chat, but I would encourage not reading what I put in the chat because I just pulled language from the report that you all have. So just so you can find where that language was. But then I would say in the same section, just to kind of support a lot of what Annalise is mentioning, the other things in here were things around like reducing the timelines for reviewing and approving things that have already been submitted, reducing delays, having clear timelines and a commitment to actually meet those timelines. So if we're told it'll be reviewed in 2 weeks, that it's actually reviewed in 2 weeks or whatever that timeline is, like having clear those commitments as well. And so I just wanted to uplift that in the same section of the report where I'm pulling this language about kind of these record access, there were also these calls for these exact same things as well of just like the process itself and what its obligations are, even questions of like, why does the system collect so much data, but then is not able to recognize when somebody has met a step? That it's only ever capable of like being like the IRS is I have to collect all the information I already gave you to give it back to you to prove that you have the things that you told me I needed to have. And it's like we need to really figure out how we're using tools more robustly to create ease of work and not just a different way of doing more work.
Yeah, I will say we did look into automatic steps this year and didn't have the capacity for the technology improvement at the moment, but we're still looking at how to do that because I agree, it should just happen. And there is also parallel processes happening right now outside of this rulemaking around those timeline pieces as well, including, providing flexibility and funding to ensure that, that's the priority for OCCD. And we're saying that's the priority with our funding and allowing them to make sure we're adding some positions for OCCD to be able to keep up with those timelines and maintaining the requirements of those timelines. So we are working on those things, I promise. All right. And if you in the night are awake and thinking about all of these things, we will have more time tomorrow. So we are going to work on the next one tomorrow. But if you have thoughts about these, I'm happy to come back as well and get more notes. And I think I'm going to let somebody else talk about RAC reimbursements if they're available to do that. This is not really my expertise.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So we are taking attendance and we'll be sending out some forms on how to receive your $50 stipend per meeting that you attend. If this is part of like your normal role as part of your job, you don't have to accept the $50 stipend. You can decline. If we don't get a response to the email, we just take that as you're declining the stipend. And so you'll receive an email from me with instructions probably early next week on how to receive that $50 stipend per meeting.
And if you are not sure if you have an agreement with Delk, you can look in your agreement about the rules about accepting those stipends. All right, everybody. Let me see if there's anything else on my slides here for today. Oh, we're going to start. So we'll start looking at career pathways tomorrow. So if you want some homework, you can go through and read that one again and take your notes. But we're happy to take your thoughts in the moment as well. So we will see you all tomorrow afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it and all of the comments. So keep them coming.